What is going on, everybody? Welcome to the second edition of the weekend roundup, where we look at the biggest developments across the world of soccer over the weekend. This weekend really will turn out, in all likelihood, to be a defining point in this season in multiple leagues for multiple different reasons. Starting, as we're almost always going to do, in the Premier League, where you had arguably the biggest game of the weekend with massive implications at the top and bottom of the table. Of course, that's the Merseyside Derby. Liverpool end up 2-0 win. Was not easy. It was everything you expect a Merseyside Derby to be, no matter where these teams are at. They just always seem to show up for this game. This was no exception. And full credit to Everton, and particularly Frank Lampard, for all of the criticism he has gotten for how awful his teams have been defensively. That was an excellent defensive performance and easily the most organized I have ever seen a Frank Lampard team look. They knew exactly what they wanted to do. They were going to sit there in that 4-5-1. They were going to put 10 players behind the ball. Maybe Richarlison was going to run a little bit. But that was a fundamentally sound shape. They knew exactly how they wanted to approach it. Yes, they did all of the dark arts. It was a combination of Jose Mourinho and Diego Simeone, and that is the best way I can put it. In Everton's defense, though, yes, it was incredibly obnoxious. They were wasting time from the first minute of the game. Anthony Gordon just dove, and that's one of my big pet peeves. Richarlison got injured 5 different times. I am all for a rule that if you require medical treatment, there should be some kind of temporary injury timeout thing where you can't come back onto the field for 2 minutes or something. That would de-incentivize that kind of nonsense. I mean, they were unabashed about it, which better than the opposite. They weren't trying to pretend they were doing anything else. But in Everton's defense, as annoying as all of that stuff was and as ugly as it made the game, you got to give them credit because they did pose a threat going forward. And that is my thing. Particularly in a situation like this, where there is such a mismatch in terms of talent and where clubs are at. And this has also been my defense of Sean Dyche's approach at Burnley. I am not somebody who, particularly when you are the underdog, believes you have any sense of obligation to actually go out and try and play in a real way. What you do have an obligation to do is try and score a goal, though. That's the issue I have with the way Diego Simeone approached that Champions League tie against Manchester City. For the first 160 plus minutes, pushing on 170, they weren't even trying offensively. They put the 5-5 out there and just sat in those low blocks and there was no kind of threat. That's when I have an issue. That was not the case with Everton. Of course, Everton were sitting in. They weren't posing that much of a threat. But they did get in behind a couple times, and Anthony Gordon was the best player on the field for large portions of that game. They were dangerous. And that, to me, is where the justification comes in. If you try and play a little bit, I've got no issue with the approach Frank Lampard took. I have an issue with the time-wasting thing, but also I just need to get over it because that's the world we live in. They put in an admirable performance. In the end, it just wasn't enough. Finally, Liverpool break through. And I've talked before about this, the Liverpool depth in this idea. You've got five players for 3 spots up front. That wasn't including Divock Origi, because Divock Origi really hasn't been a factor in the Premier League this year, except for in situations where games were over or something like that. He comes in, he gets involved in the first goal, doesn't end up actually getting any credit for it, but he plays a part to help set up Mo Salah, who then sets up Andy Robertson, and then he gets the second one. For whatever reason, that guy against Everton, every time he shows up, he gets the goal. They do, so they ultimately find a way, and that first goal, after that, Everton really didn't do much going forward. And that is the danger that you pose when you're so defensively minded. Can you flip that switch immediately when you have to? Everton couldn't. It ultimately ends in defeat, an admirable defeat, but a defeat nonetheless. Liverpool get through one of the trickiest fixtures left on their schedule. Yes, they are going to play better teams, but it's one of those situations where there just are few things more dangerous, especially when you don't play Manchester City. If I'm Jurgen Klopp and there are games I want to avoid, it is against my arch rivals who are in a fight for survival. And Liverpool's tenacity, I mean, it was an ugly first half. They didn't do much. I would argue Jurgen Klopp was significantly outcoached by Frank Lampard, which is something I never thought I would ever say. But in the end, they do enough to get through. That's all that matters. They get the 3 points. And Manchester City does their job. Gabriel Jesus scores 4 goals. They beat Watford 5-1. Closing that gap on the goal differential. I'm going to keep bringing this up because otherwise it's the same. Well, if somebody loses, then the other one clearly has an edge. Or if somebody slips up, even drops points. Because the question is whether one of these two teams are going to do anything but win the rest of their games. If it comes to that, though, if Manchester City can keep putting these kind of results together and pile on the goals, that conversation becomes a little bit different because that gap it's still Liverpool's advantage, but that gap is closing. Good for Jesus. His future is a very interesting topic for the summer, especially with Holland apparently being close to joining City. I'm not going to go too deep into that today, but good for him. Excellent performance. So you've got the same situation up at the top. It's still 1 point. And then on the flip side of this, not only do Everton lose, but Everton go into that game knowing Burnley has already won again. So Everton is now in the relegation zone. Burnley have at least temporarily gotten themselves out. Everton still have an extra game to play. This is far from over. But what Burnley have been able to do is A, actually win and pick up points. That's 7 from their last 3 games. And B, get to a point where this is interesting again. Because that gap was, of course, they were always, Everton never felt safe. But that gap was not at the point where one game could swing everything. And Burnley had very quickly closed that gap to the point where this is, one game for either of those teams had Everton managed to get a draw against Liverpool or somehow managed to win that game, that could have been the difference. Or if Burnley can go on and win another one, that could be the difference. Or if Burnley get a point somewhere and Everton really they have changed this to the point where it's now up for the grabs, as opposed to Burnley chasing Everton. That's the best way to put it. I still stand by my fundamental belief about the Dyche firing, but you have to give that coaching staff credit for not trying to change everything, not trying to change who Burnley are, but also not just going with the status quo. If there's a criticism to throw at Sean Dyche, it's that he just kept the status quo too long and didn't change anything even when it wasn't working anymore. Burnley are always going to be Burnley, but there were some, Jack Cork is back in there. They are playing a little bit more freely. They're scoring goals. You're getting contributions from a variety of players, which has been one of the issues. If your striker, whether that was Chris Wood or now Wout Weghorst, isn't scoring, where are those goals? And Maxwell Cornet is unavailable. Where are those goals coming from? And all of a sudden, they're coming from multiple places here. So this relegation race got real tight. All of a sudden, Leeds are kind of in it again. They got to be careful. And so this Merseyside Derby, just implication, you get the double whammy if you're Everton. You put in a good performance, you still lose to Liverpool, and that drops you into the relegation zone. Still plenty of time to make it up. I'm still going to pick Everton, especially after what I saw in that performance, to find a way to survive. But this is a new level of new threat level. If you're sort of going, level 1, level 2, level 3, this is up to level 4 out of 5. It is getting real dangerous for Frank Lampard, which is something that is still hard to comprehend, but that is absolutely where we're at. The other defining moment in the Premier League this weekend, what happened in the race for the top 4. Arsenal get the 3-1 win over Manchester United. Come out strong. And then United absolutely get back into this game. Ronaldo scores one of those goals that I talked about this in my column on Eric Den Haag in the Substack. Their best offensive threat right now is just individual Ronaldo brilliance. That's what this goal came from. That is something that Ten Hag should be able to fix. How much it matters overall is yet to be determined with all of the other structural, more important issues that need to be addressed. That's the part I'm not sold on him with. But finding a way to get this team playing better offensively, absolutely he can do it. So they get their prototypical goal from this season and are inches away from this being 3-2 United. They really did respond and put up a fight. Ultimately, Fernandes misses the penalty. You get the tough VAR decision. And here we are. Arsenal find a way to hold on. And then Spurs proceed to be lifeless and attack for a second consecutive game and draw 0-0 with Brentford, which puts Arsenal back in 4th place and in control of this final Champions League spot. The good news for Spurs is you still have that 6-pointer, that North London derby, but that is quickly becoming a must-win. Now, there's every chance that this changes again next weekend with the inconsistency these two teams are showing. But Arsenal managed to do it, and I talked about this previewing stuff, looking ahead to this weekend. Okay, you got the great win against Chelsea. Can you do it again against United and really put pressure on Tottenham to respond from their poor performance? That's exactly what Arsenal did. Spurs couldn't answer, and so this is back to being Arsenal's for the taking. So congratulations to Mikel Arteta. And this is the final thing I'll say on Arsenal. Every time it has gotten shaky, they have responded emphatically. And you've got to give him and those players credit for that. That is a cultural thing he has instilled that did not exist before he was there. And then Serie A, the other title race that is still captivating. Inter, and we talked about, this is the most difficult games, arguably, for both Inter and AC Milan were this weekend. Inter scored 3 in a 23-minute stretch on either side of halftime to beat Roma fairly comfortably. AC Milan go into their game against Lazio knowing that. Ciro Immobile opens the scoring. Olivier Giroud gets one back midway through the second half. And then Sandro Tonali completes the comeback in the 92nd minute off of a Zlatan Ibrahimovic header. Zlatan just doing Zlatan things. Was not a pretty goal, but it was beautiful for AC Milan. They keep themselves right there applying pressure, making Inter win all of these games. And so that one is still very much up for grabs. Every bit as captivating as the Premier League race from my perspective. You've got 2 leagues here that were actually clinched over the weekend. Congratulations, PSG, Bayern Munich. PSG don't get the win, but they get the point they need. This was never in doubt from my perspective after the embarrassment of last season. They just came in and did what they were supposed to do. That's 8 league titles in 10 seasons for PSG. Bayern just picked up 10 out of 10. And that's the team I want to focus on here. For a couple reasons. One, just to emphasize how consistent they have been and how large that gap is. because I feel like we look at the Bundesliga with Dortmund and what Leipzig have become, and we don't feel like there's this Bayern and then everybody else kind of thing, the way we do in France and to a certain extent Italy. Now, of course, it is Bayern and everybody else, but that we feel like there are two teams in Germany or three teams, where we feel like there's one in France and typically one over the last decade, one maybe two in Italy. There's never been a maybe about Dortmund. Dortmund's always been dangerous, Champions League success, all of that stuff. Except that, as I mentioned, PSG only have 8 out of 10. Juventus, unless they do something absolutely incredible, are going to have 8 league titles in 10 years, not winning it this season or last season. And here's Bayern with the 10th in a row. And, I talked about this in my 5 things from the week that just went out this morning on the Substack, but if you're looking at it from Dortmund's perspective and you feel like there's a year to get Bayern, it's this one. You have Holland. Bayern is coming off of a somewhat shaky, from their perspective, season. They clearly are not anywhere near where they were 2 years ago. They lost to Villarreal in the Champions League, and that just doesn't happen to Bayern. You can go back and look at who they've lost to. They don't lose to opponents they know they're better than. They lose to PSG, they lose to Inter, they lose to Real Madrid, they lose to Barcelona. The question is sort of where are they in this European hierarchy, not can they beat the teams they're supposed to, the way that PSG has struggled to at times, the way Juventus especially has struggled to these past couple years, right? You don't think of Bayern as a team that gets upset in the Champions League. And that's what happened this year. There are clearly issues. Nagelsmann's first season was not smooth. And yet, here we are, and Dortmund weren't particularly close. They clinch it with 3 games to go. And now, Holland is in all likelihood gone. But from Bayern's perspective, it's fascinating that, right, there is no reason to believe that anybody is close to catching them in Germany. And at the same time, they are very insecure about their place as one of Europe's elite at this moment. Questions about, can we get the players we need to in with this ever-changing financial landscape and the financial firepower we're now facing and the limitations that come with the German system and Bayern's ownership structure? Is Robert Lewandowski part of the short and or long-term future? Is he, the line seems to be he's going to be there next year, but also, are you going to take the risk of letting him walk for free? Can you get that contract figured out, or is he gone this summer? Because if he's gone this summer, what kind of replacement are you bringing in? Because you can't just replace him. I mean, I guess if it's Holland, I would argue that's comparable. But it doesn't look like that's going to be the case. So there are questions about the futures of important players on that team. You lost David Alaba in a somewhat similar situation to Real Madrid. But they are still just a level above everybody else in Germany that I don't think we fully appreciate because of what Dortmund has been able to do sort of outside the Bundesliga. The Champions League and making some of those runs. But here we are. PSG have faltered in the league. Juventus are just not a factor in the title race for a second year in a row. And here's Bayern with 10 consecutive league titles. So, brilliant consistency. Give them all the credit in the world. They are serial winners. The question becomes, at the start of next season and by the end of next season, where are they in the sort of the Champions League structure? Are they getting to sort of that, and they're certainly not there yet, but it's Barcelona, so they could do this, but also we get reminded very quickly they're just not on the same level as a Man City. In, years past it had been Bayern. Bayern thumped them. Where are Bayern remaining one of the favorites to win the Champions League, or are they one of those teams that you can't rule them out because they've done this before, they're so experienced, so well drilled, but you're looking at other spots for those favorites. That is the question: is kind of can they keep their spot as a top three-ish club in the world, or is it more like 5-6? It's just fascinating that they are facing so much uncertainty, and yet there is just no doubt who the superior team in the Bundesliga is, and no reason to believe that's changing anytime soon. Here in the United States, a couple things to touch on before we get out of here. 2 Major League Soccer coaches got fired last week. Both of their teams proceeded to win in different fashions. DC United defeat New England Revolution. Major League Soccer, meet Taxi Funtas, is starting to actually sort of get into a rhythm with DC and get those minutes on the field. Got the start in this game. 2 goals, 1 assist. You watched him for 5 minutes and you went, oh, this dude is different. Maybe it was just, New England is struggling mightily, weren't ready for this guy, and he kind of just got to do his thing with some pressure off of him. We'll see if he can keep it up moving forward, but my goodness, he was impressive. And if this somehow turns into, I'm almost to the point where if this turns into Taxi Funtas and Gareth Bale, all of a sudden I am really intrigued about what DC United can do. We're a long way from that, but that's how impressive he was. So they get the 3-2 win. San Jose Earthquakes, just a mess all around, and I didn't really get to dive too deep into this, but the ownership situation, and just Matias Almeida needed to be fired in the summer. It was clear that this was not working and he wanted out, and he was not going to benefit this team moving forward, yet they managed to not fire him until now. But they do finally make that decision. Too late, in my opinion, but they get it done, and here you go. 3 unanswered goals starting in the 64th minute to beat the Seattle Sounders 4-3. Just MLS things. It's what makes this league amazing. Any given week, in any given situation, anybody can beat anybody. Don't have too much on the San Jose angle. I'm going to attribute this to the relief and new manager bounce and playing guys in their real positions and things like that. I do want to touch on Seattle for a second, though. It's obviously been a rough start. The priority has been the Champions League because they got to the final. That is going to be the priority until that is done in a week and a half or so, I believe, here. The next couple weeks, you are trying to become the first MLS team to win that competition. That's where the focus is going to be. So it hasn't been pretty. They haven't been able to get all of the pieces onto the field for the most part. Now, this game, you did have Ruidíaz, Ladero, Rusnak, Roldan, Morris, kind of all the guys out there. That hasn't happened this season. So that is slightly concerning and diminishes my point to a certain extent. But also, it's one game in Major League Soccer when you're focusing on the CONCACAF Champions League final. And you've got this bizarre situation in San Jose. I'm not going to overreact to this. I'm going to hold firm to my belief that the standings will not indicate it. They're going to have some bumps, and just with this start, I don't see any way in which they win the Supporters' Shield or come particularly close. The way LAFC are playing, the way I feel about the Philadelphia Union, I just think they've got too much work to do with the start they've had. And no team in Major League Soccer knows better than the Seattle Sounders. It just doesn't matter when it comes to the playoffs. I firmly believe this is Brian Smetcher's best team. They will be the team you do not want to play come November, December, MLS Cup time, MLS playoffs time. I don't care how it gets done. I am 100% sold on this roster, which is an easy thing to do when you keep all of your pieces and add Albert Rusnak, who, again, he hasn't really gotten into a rhythm yet. I just think it's going to take some time for them to figure out how to play all these guys together and how to fit those pieces together. It's so I'm not convinced this is going to turn around immediately. I think it's going to be a little bit of a struggle. But you're going to look up in October, and they're going to be rising up the standings and finish, fourth in the West or whatever, and dispatch LAFC and show up in MLS Cup again. There's a lot is going to have to change for me to alter my beliefs on that. I will continue to believe this team has ever been as good as advertised, and this team is going to deliver in the postseason after what happened last year. Just wanted to throw that out there since we got to talk some MLS today. Also going to touch on NWSL real quickly here, just to acknowledge we do have our semifinalists in the Challenge Cup. It's kind of a weird situation with the Challenge Cup because it's not the regular season yet. You've got teams who are still trying to figure out who they are because, they're expansion teams, working some players in. This is sort of a warm-up for the regular season. Some teams were just more ready than others to really compete for this. Some it's sort of a progressive build. So your 4 finalists. Not too many surprises here. OL Reign, all kinds of talent on that roster. Washington Spirit, your defending NWSL champions. Kansas City Current, North Carolina Courage. Those are your semifinal matchups. So this is where, we sort of, everybody's prioritized different things in this competition. But now we have the 4 teams. You've got your 3 division winners, your top team that finished in second place. That's how this came to be, and these 4 teams ended up qualifying. Reign Spirit games are always amazing. Really looking forward to that one. They're actually going to play on the weekend before in NWSL regular season play. It's a strange thing. We'll touch more on that on the live show Wednesday. But wanted to acknowledge that. Congratulations to those 4 teams. Looking forward to those semifinals and ultimately the final here. That's all I've got for you this morning on the Weekend Roundup. Thank you so much for listening.